All right, hey, what's up? I had an idea, and that idea was I'm gonna watch all the Marvel movies, like as a marathon, because quarantine is slowly sapping me of my life force. I thought, might as well make something of it. This isn't even gonna really have a point. It's just sort of a vlog. I'm gonna give opinions on the movies. I'm watching all of them, including The Hulk and Thor: The Dark World. So strap in. Now, the marathons like this are not something that are a stranger to me. Every September, I watch all of the extended Lord of the Rings, and that's 12 hours, and I do that in a row with friends, and we have jokes, and it's a good time. I recommend it. But for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take three movies. I'm going to watch three a day. One of the days, I don't know which one, I'm going to watch four instead. According to this chart, this one here. And I have acquired all of the movies legally. So don't don't sue me. Let the mental deterioration begin. Okay, so that was the first watch day, which was Captain America 1, then Captain Marvel, then Iron Man. Uh, so for Captain America 1, I'd already watched it coincidentally about a month ago. And honestly, if you so I'll talk about Iron Man in a second, but Iron Man was the first one obviously ever released in the MCU. And I think that probably, if you go by this chart, Captain America 1 is actually a really good place to start. It's a bit more polished. It leans away from the real life stuff that Iron Man was. Iron Man was like it leaned into some real life stuff to hedge their bets. Basically, they didn't want it to be too comic booky because they didn't know whether people would buy that yet. Because up to this point, comic book movies have been flops, all the way. So with the first Avenger, Captain America 1, they got really back into the comic book stuff, and obviously there is some history stuff, like there is a World War II, but no Holocaust. I wonder why. But the historical stuff is second place to all the comic booky stuff. In fact, they have that thing where they're printing propaganda comic books, and I'm like, nice, because that's where Captain America got to start. He only got the Man Out of Time stuff a little while later, and I'm glad that they started with a whole story back in the World War II. They could have just not. They could have had him, he was a hero back then, and now he's awake, and that would have been more in line with like the current canon, like comic canon. But they started their own canon by setting it in the World War II days, inside of the World War II. Now, I'm not going to rate these out of 10, because I don't know if I would be able to do that consistently. I might do a tier list. That would be fun, but that would be way like after, like at the end of everything. Anyway, decent movie, decent good. There were some touchy bits, like the part where like the woman was like, "You're Captain America," and was like, and then the girl that Captain America's into was like, she walked in the room and she was like, and it's like, stop. We've seen this in sitcoms. Like, that's not, don't do that. And then for the second one, it was Captain Marvel, which I had not seen. And that's because I really like Carol Danvers in the comics, and I didn't want to see a movie mess it up. As it turns out, that messing it up was just completely fabricated, obviously. Where was I? That outrage was completely fabricated, obviously, by the anti-feminists and idiots and geeks online. As it turns out, it's like a good movie. This was obviously when they were already in the swing of things and they knew how to make a Marvel movie. There wasn't any early hiccups like there were in like the early Iron Mans or like Thor: The Dark World. None of that. So they knew pacing, they knew dialogue, they knew tight action. The action in this movie is hilarious. Like, definitely going into the Marvel action comedy sort of genre. One of the bad guys, right, was like, it had a mace, like an electric mace or something, and Captain Marvel, who was not Captain Marvel yet by that point, like, did something, and the guy landed, like, his temple hit the mace, and he bonk, and he and that's like a good scene. And in the same scene, one of them yelled in a sort of monstery way, like, and she just went and hit him with some. Consistently, her characterization in the MCU appears to be like, does not play to tropes, and I think that's pretty faithful. Like, if someone starts to do a one-liner or starts to monologue, she just blasts them, and she doesn't buy into like little tropes like that, and I think that's hilarious. Now, I understood the thing as a metaphor for basically sexism in society. She has power, and it's taken away from her by a plan, by a greater inorganic, even multifaceted organism, essentially, right? And I got it, but then it reminded me a lot, and I'm like, I'm not stupid. But then again, I do think about this kind of thing a lot anyway, so like maybe I was just attuned to it more, and it would have taken more for the average audience to get it. I don't know. They probably did a lot of test screening. Anyway, Captain Marvel, I did not expect to be as good as it was. Now, I think it would have been far more ideal to place this, like release this, way earlier on in the continuity, which is why this watch order is fantastic, is because rather than Captain Marvel showing up out of nowhere, she's a force that occurs and then is only needed when she is really needed. And that's fair, you know, as Marvel's nod to Superman, like, who can do roughly anything, you know, that's fair. Also, the de-aging in this movie is fantastic. There was not one time where it felt weird or awkward, which is hard to say for a lot of films. I'm gonna throw up. Here it comes. Like, they de-aged Samuel L. Jackson really well, and it's weird. I like it. Same thing in Captain America. They gave him the tiny boy body for the first part of the movie, and it looked good. It just goes to show you, I guess, you know, if you put enough time and money into visual effects, people won't care. They won't notice. That's the idea. And then finally was Iron Man 1, which, God, I don't think I've seen that since 2008, and I was 10. So Iron Man 1 deals with the wars in the Middle East in an uncomfortable way, even. Ultimately, what I think is interesting is that these guys, although they do have their own sort of pretty malicious goals, you know, they are ultimately fed by a capitalist, like an American capitalist who wants to make money. It's weird how one of the most capitalistic enterprises in America right now is making movies against greed. But here we are. And as subtext, I think that works really well. It plays to some real life quandaries. Like, terrorism didn't spawn out of nowhere, you know? Like, the reason that it exists is a combination of, yes, some deeply held beliefs about America specifically and the West in general, whatever that's supposed to mean at any given time, and also has to do with our involvement in the Middle East and generally Western involvement, but specifically American involvement. It's been abusive for a long time, and it's not an excuse, but it is a cause, and it's a cause that you can come to learn about just through, I don't know, research. Go read a book. As for the movie itself, like the rest of it, it's paced decently. Now, the Jeff Bridges as the bad guy is awesome until he becomes the big boy in the suit. Then he just sort of acts like a Hulk bad guy, like a big monster to fight. And it's less interesting because he's smart, he's savvy, he's distinctly amoral. He does things in an amoral way, but he hates Tony. And if they just gone with a more sadistic sort of route, rather than just I'm the bad guy, then it would have been a more interesting. We would have known Obadiah Stane. You would know that name, but they didn't. And I don't know whether that was because it was early on in the MCU and they didn't want to take as many risks, or because they just were lazy at writing. It happens. So, generally speaking, these were good, and that is not going to continue. You will see for my next docket of 3. This was April 25th's 3 movies vlog. We'll do 26th next time. Here's the chart again. Oops, oops, oops. Alright, day 2. April 26th is phase 2 of the Marvel movies. Not literally. What I actually did was I cleaned out phase 1, so I did the Avengers 2. So I did Iron Man 2, I did Thor 1, I did the Incredible Hulk, and I did the Avengers 1. I would say that you can swap around Thor and the Incredible Hulk. I'm just going to preface this entire bit with that. Because Hulk is mentioned in Thor, and Thor is not mentioned in Hulk. It's not. It's just a little thing. I guess you can do it like as a. Ignore me. I'm very tired. So first one, Iron Man 2. I have never disliked Iron Man 2. I've heard people say that it's either the best or the worst of all the Marvel movies, and I can't remember which one they call it. But I really like it. And I really like it because it is the first thing that humanizes Tony Stark. Tony Stark will always be a total douchebag, and it's true. Even upon being a hero, he is still a total douchebag, and that's just his character, and that's fine. And I kind of like it. It separates him from the other douchebaggy heroes because it is so permanent for him. What we see in Iron Man 2 is Tony dealing with his own mortality, which will really, that's going to characterize anybody. If you put him in a situation where they might die and then they recognize it and then do something about it, then that's going to change their personality. You know what I mean? Otherwise, I thought it was good too. The plot was good. War Machine was fun. The relationship between Tony Stark and Pepper Potts is still basically the most believable in the entire cinematic universe. There's a lot of movies. Also, this one had Sam Rockwell, and I love him. Bring him back, bring him back, bring him back. Marvel is too much cowards to bring back Sam Rockwell, my man, my boy. I want him back in the movies. Anyway, Iron Man 2, better than Iron Man 1. Definitely more MCU than Iron Man 1. I would call the MCU sort of a genre. You have expectations, and there's a tone that is consistent, relatively consistent, throughout the entire canon. And if it breaks from that tone, or those expectations, you could almost not even consider it part of the MCU, and we'll get to that. Next up was Thor 1, which I've always had a soft spot for, because I think it's hilarious, and I think it's hard to make it not funny. The concept itself is so funny that it stands alone. I love fish out of water stories, always, because, I used to do hypotheticals about them as a kid. What if someone from the 1200s came by here and saw all the bound books that we have? It's like, whoa. It was just a fun brain teaser. And then we've got that mixed with this hyper arrogant idiot played by Chris Hemsworth with the face. And the face is perfect because he's not his haircut makes him look less cut, you know what I mean? His face is not as square and cover of a magazine as it is when his hair is with it long, he kind of looks oval like a teddy bear. And so we've got this face, and we've got this idiot prince personality, and that combined with the fish out of water story is a chef's kiss. It's beautiful, and I think that they did it exactly as long as it should have been done. They did it any more, it probably would have dragged. But something about the MCU and pacing, man, I don't know. All these movies are really well paced. As for the plot and everything, this is where we're introduced to Loki, who becomes the bad guy in the Avengers. And I was thinking about it, the bad guy in the Avengers had to be a standalone threat, and Loki can handle that. And his character and his actor, they can handle that, right? If you're just coming into the series and you're just watching it alone, it's fine. With the background of him going through a little tiny character arc from being shrewd to giving up on shrewdness and trying complete domination just to earn the title of king, works. It works, and it works for the Avengers, which comes later. I would also argue that you switch. I already talked about this. God, I'm tired. Just do the switchy thing, and if Thor comes right before the Avengers, first of all, we have the Hulk more time to settle, so there's not whiplash of him being a different actor. We'll get to that. And also you have a more immediate Loki, which is more important, because the Hulk hides away in a different location, so it sort of makes sense that you can have a whole movie without him. You know what I mean? That's what I think is optimal. The plot is a little dry, and you know what I said about pacing? The pacing is a little wonky because the build-up is kind of sudden, but whatever. It definitely didn't ruin the movie. It was just sort of strange. It was like, wow, that was quick. And the bad guy, I know that people don't like big CG boys. I like this big CG boy. I like that he has no face and he spits the sun out. That's pretty cool. Next was the Incredible Hulk, which I had not seen. You can guess why. The Incredible Hulk is not incredible. It's actually not a terrible movie. It's just not very good. And the reason it's not very good is not because of the plot, which is very standard, like, intro to Hulk stuff. And it's not because of, like, the action. The action's actually pretty good. It's not even really because of the CG. I can handle it. It looks sort of like PS3 graphics. It's not great. But the reason the Incredible Hulk is not very good and doesn't even really feel like an MCU movie is, like, one, it's not funny. There's a joke in it, and it's like a boomer joke. It's not funny. And also, comedy isn't required, but there is a lightheartedness to the MCU that makes it distinct from, like, the DCEU. Also the quality, but also the tone of it makes it distinct. It also tends to it doesn't tackle anything. It tends to tackle bigger subjects. You can see how that happened. The MCU tends to tackle bigger subjects in a relatively, like, shallow way. It's not like a super deep series, but it's present and it's enough to, like, jog your brain a little bit while you're watching the popcorn movie. It's fine. Incredible Hulk does not have that. It sure tries, and it's sad because the Hulk is, like, my favorite Marvel character. He is actually extremely deep once you get to know him. But they just they didn't give him any writing to act on, His dialogue consists of furthering the plot stuff and not character stuff. And that's like a waste of the Hulk, because the Hulk has a couple things he has to deal with in order to really be the Hulk. And we get to see these later in the MCU. First of all, like, technically speaking, according to current canon, the Hulk is mentally ill. That's why he does the thing. If anyone else received his abilities, they might not do the whole angry boy thing. And I think, what's his name? So in the canon, there are a couple people who do a Hulk-like thing. I'm getting way sidetracked, but, like, that's one of the things that he has to tackle, and he does tackle that, which is why in the new Avengers, like the most recent phase, we see Professor Hulk who's smart, and he has the brain. Theoretically, and I hope this happens, when that Hulk gets angry, he reverts into physically Banner, mentally Savage Hulk. Like, it switches, and it's really funny, and I hope they do it, because it's just a really angry Mark Ruffalo. Oh, man. And he also has to deal with, obviously, his anger, and the fact that his heroism causes destruction, and also his immortality. He cannot die, and that is, like, a great place where you can look at survivor's guilt and, like, anyway, what I'm getting at is that the Hulk is amazing, and read him. The movies it's the writing, and it's also kind of the acting. They don't really do their best, and I would definitely put that up to the director, because these are really good actors. It was so non-MCU that I was surprised when Tony Stark came in for a cameo at the end. I'm like, oh yeah. Anyway, okay, not a god-awful movie, just not good. And that it's possibly the worst Marvel movie, which is really not saying much, because they have a generally decent quality to all of them. I have not gotten to Thor 2: The Dark World. First time I saw that, I was a little baby boy, and I haven't seen it since. I recall nothing. Anyway, last stop on this one for April 26th was The Avengers. Now, I realize that I've seen Phase 1 the most, because I remember that I've seen The Avengers the most. I may have seen The Avengers 4 or 5 times. And for me, that sounds like a lot, but it's really not. I do rewatch movies, like, a lot. You can pick up on a lot of stuff on a rewatch, I don't know. The Avengers is still really well-paced, really well-written, really well-acted, and it covers a lot. It covers a lot in its short runtime. And all of these Avengers movies, including Age of Ultron, have this ability to include each character for just the right amount of time that you know they're there, you know what they're doing, you know them as characters, like you understand them, and also they don't overshadow any other characters. Like, you get to know Hawkeye. In the Avengers, Hawkeye is like a present guy. And good, because I love Hawkeye. But if there was one guy who would be dropped out of this little passing of the baton in the pacing, it would be Hawkeye. But no. They even go through a whole thing when they make him the bad guy, and it's awesome. Do not disrespect Hawkeye and Black Widow. The thing is about them is that they are the least hero in the entire group. Even the Hulk is more hero than Black Widow and Hawkeye. They're good people, generally speaking. They're nice. Maybe not Black Widow so much, but, you know, they're nice, generally speaking. But they are assassins. They're mercenaries. They are chaotic neutral at best. Maybe lawful neutral. That's another discussion. And they do things in this movie. You know, they don't have blasty boys on their hands, and they don't expand, but they do things. Now, one thing I've always found a little weird about the Avengers is that they don't really introduce the idea of the Chitauri before the Avengers, and that's the army that comes through that's the whole army. They don't really do anything with introducing those creatures at all. And they are creatures. They're not people. They do not behave like people. They also apparently die when the mothership explodes, which is sort of a cop-out, but they had that in the movie. If they had taken a little time in any of the previous movies to just drop the name, you know, like, it would have been better. Just a touch, you know. We've got Thor talking about all these aliens, and he's like, here's where all the things are in the universe. And he couldn't go on like, and this is the weird insect people from the you know, didn't. The only other gripe is that the lighting can be a little flat at times. It kind of looks like a TV show. But that also is kind of what New York City would look like if that happened. It's a sunny day, you know. Like, it's really not that much of a complaint. And it's visible. It's very, very visible. I can tell you that much. So I'm not particularly upset by that. Otherwise, the movie is phenomenal. Like, for a popcorn movie, it is roughly perfect. And they continue to do this with Avengers movies. Age of Ultron is a little more iffy. But when I talk about Infinity War and Endgame, I'm just going to explain how it's good. You know, like, those are still so, like, they have it down to a science per second, how they edit these things. And it's mind-blowing. Anyway, that is April 26th. Those four, and then the next three are here. I also changed up the order a little bit later, you'll see. Alright, April 27th was was it part 3? I think it was day 3. Okay, so this one I did Iron Man 3, Thor 2, and Captain America 2. I keep forgetting to take these off. Iron Man 3 was alright. It was okay. It wasn't my favorite Iron Man. It's far from my favorite Iron Man. The bunch of Iron Men at the end seemed a little out of nowhere. I understand how it happened. It's completely viable that he tinkers all the time, so he makes a bunch, you know. I get it. I just didn't... They weren't placed, so I didn't feel their return as warranted per se, and that's a huge slip up because really, like, continuity and pacing is what makes the films, you know. That's it. And I'll get to that in a second. The characterization on Iron Man 3 was fine. It was okay. I kind of wish, did they keep Pepper's heat powers around, because that would have been pretty rad. I think they took it away, which is not cool, because I would like to see a rapidly regenerating Fire Woman as a character. It'd be pretty cool. All in all, I think I like Iron Man 2 more than I like Iron Man 3. Because 3 has, it's got like a quality to it that seems, I don't know if that's just the fatigue talking, but it seems as though it doesn't have much to offer compared to the others. There's less to talk about and think about and have fun with. Anyway, not a whole lot to say about 3. Thor 2 is known as like the worst. It's like people think it's the worst MCU movie. And I have a proposition. If Thor were the only MCU series, I would agree. If Thor were it, I get why no one likes Thor. But there are other stories in this universe, right, that convey slightly more, I don't know, complex, modern, maybe, plots and characters. And having a background of very simple, like, kings and princes, dynasty stuff with, like, really, like, love at first sight romance, that's fine because it's Thor. Like, if you're going to have a story like that, it should use characters like Thor. And as Thor progresses in the universe, he basically becomes updated. Like, he grows to the complexities we expect out of modern plots and characters. So having this foundation is really not a bad thing. And taking that into account, it's kind of an alright movie. Like, it's pretty decent. First of all, I love the idea that there's a race of aliens that is super into dark matter and all the things that dark matter can do, even hypothetically. It's a cool power because a lot of these powers are just sort of based on nothing. Like, what's her name? Captain Marvel's got photon blasts, and it's like, what? How do you store the energy in your human veins? You know, like, it doesn't scan. But these creatures have the technology. Creatures is maybe a bit of a, they did that in the movie, and I was like, this race of people, I guess, has the technology to manipulate dark matter, and that's really cool. So I'm glad they went with. I kind of wish they brought some of that back, like some dark matter stuff, because they have grenades that like produce a little dark matter, and dark matter, when it comes into contact with normal matter, they cancel each other out. So it's like a miniature black hole for a second. That's the grenade. That's like the best idea in the entire MCU, and it's awesome. Otherwise, the plot's like bog standard. Loki's fun. We get to see Loki as not the villain from Avengers, but sort of he's a little more complicated than just a villain. You know, he is a villain, and it's fun because he loves being a villain, and I can see why. But he's also like a character otherwise, which is important. Also, the dude from Chernobyl is really good in Thor all the time. And I love him. Now, what was the third one? Captain America 2. This is regarded as one of the best of the MCU. And again, I'm going to have to be a contrarian because I don't think it's one of the best of the MCU. I think it's a little trite in places where people say it's supposed to feel grounded. The idea that there is a secret cabal that is causing all of the bad things of the world is some seriously conspiratorial stuff, and it leads into dark places, realistically. Like, to claim that that is the basis of your fiction, that's fine, I suppose. But to then have people claim that that's what makes it realistic is a little jarring. It's a little unnerving, and I don't like that. The action is okay. The action is far from my favorite in the MCU. It's not even close, honestly. It's most of the action is people shooting guns or two guys hitting each other. There's nothing creative. Like, remember that thing in the first part with Captain Marvel and the electric mace, and guy hits his temple on it and falls on the ground? That creates a slapstick. It creates a sense of sudden movement, stop, and then reaction. That's the basis of slapstick, and they put it, and it's good. But in this, it just is like watching people do a complicated martial arts dance, and it's not interesting to look at. Like, I zoned out twice during some of these, like, nothing. The best part was probably the characterization of Black Widow. Black Widow, when she gets her own movie, I'm gonna see her movie in theaters, definitely, for sure. Because Black Widow is cool, and people really forget about Black Widow for, well, and I think that's unfair. Because, like, she has no powers, and yet she is holding her own against all of these various threats. She's cool. She's trained, and she's focused, and she's an assassin. And it's cool. Otherwise, they introduced the Falcon, which is awesome, because love. And I know that people are upset that Captain America's gone now. Let the guy do other movies. The Falcon can step into that role. Absolutely, no problem. He needs to be characterized more, and that's what I'll be expecting from this next movie. But as we know him now, he's just a nice guy. And despite the gung-ho nature of a lot of these movies, he's not like super pro-military, you know what I mean? He's for the soldiers. He does not like the system that puts the soldiers in these situations. And, power to him. Like, that's, if you want to talk about superheroes, people who volunteer at the VA, The wings are cool. And I think a lot of people really like the Bucky Barnes stuff. And I don't get it. Like, it didn't feel sold. And I don't exactly know why. I'd have to probably look into it. But I feel as though the acting, perhaps, or the writing, something about it lacked something, some sort of fundamental connection. And I saw them attempt with this flashback with the, we're in this till the end of the line, or whatever, and then he says it, and Bucky's like, and he has that face where he's like, but I didn't buy it. And I'm a little confused canonically here, and this is probably my fault. Bucky's got a Soviet star on his shoulder. They keep saying he's a Soviet thing and he was taken by the Russians. But he works for Hydra. Is there a connection here? Because that would be really weird, because the Nazis and the communists, like, hated each other. Their whole thing was fighting each other. Like, besides Nazis wanting to take over the world, they basically just fought Russia. I guess it's, generic World War II, Cold War era bad guys mushed together. Because they can't get into the details. Like, people don't know the details, so they can't get into them. Wouldn't work for a popcorn movie. Oh, and by the way, to anyone who says that this movie is more grounded politically than the other ones, you've been reading too much 1984. Like, knock it off. It's ridiculous. The progenitor of all these ideas is a man who put his brain on tape, basically, and it's dumb. I don't know. I don't buy into the espionage. Well, those are the three that I saw. And today I'm doing Guardians of the Galaxy 1, Guardians of the Galaxy 2, and Age of Ultron. I saw Guardians of the Galaxy 2 twice. I've only seen the first one once. And I only saw Age of Ultron once, and only in theaters. And that was, a long time ago. So, we'll see. This was April 27th. All right, so April 28th was Guardians of the Galaxy 1, Guardians of the Galaxy 2, and Age of Ultron. And this was sort of an interesting day. Like I said, I've seen Guardians once, and I've seen Guardians 2 twice. And it's interesting watching them back to back, because Guardians 1 is like pre-Rainbow MCU, and Guardians 2 is post-Rainbow MCU. And I think that makes sense. Like that categorization. There is a point in the MCU in which the colors became very neon and like rainbowy. It was never really dull, but there was a phase in the MCU where everything was more blue and orange than it was rainbow, and that was just sort of following the early 2010s trend of blue and orange. And we'll get to that. And Guardians 1 is fun, and I think that it laying the groundwork for Guardians 2 is important. On its own, it's still like a really well-paced movie, and I think that the team in Guardians 1 is maybe more established than the team in Avengers 1. Like, I don't know, it's just like they play off each other more correctly. Like, it fits better. I don't know. Now that I'm getting into the MCU again and I'm seeing all the Infinity Stones coming into play, I thought uh, I'll I'll get to it later, but Guardians of the Galaxy 1 plot wise was alright. Um, what it comes down to in Guardians 1 is the acting and the characters, and those are really good. It's just fun. It's probably the most fun MCU movie, or at least up there with them. Thor Ragnarok is up there too. I don't think there's all that much more to say about it. I want to note that Groot is simultaneously extremely powerful and extremely pleasant, and more of that, more Superman stuff in the MCU, please. Those are fun. And I would like to see him back to full size as soon as possible. Guardians 2, well, so first of all, it's substantially better than Guardians 1, but in a different way. I wouldn't say it's as fun because it's more intense. There's more stuff to deal with in terms of interpersonal relationships, and that's more interesting. I think maybe I'm being affected by Lindsay Ellis's video essay on 2, but the extent to which tropes are played with in these relationships is interesting. Like the idea that Peter doesn't get the girl because he's an idiot. Like, yes, more of that, please. Like, more stories that explain that if you're this hyper-confident fool, then you're not going to have a fulfilling relationship because you yourself are not comfortable with yourself yet. Does that make sense? The thing I don't know if I liked, this is just, I think this may be the only aspect of the movie that threw me for a loop. I did not like how they killed a god, basically. They're ragtag idiots from nowhere. Like, they should have gone through more in order to kill a god. There was something, I don't know, maybe the god didn't try very hard to kill everybody? Because I feel like if you had control over a planet that you created and you were alive for millions and millions of years, you would just be able to murder everybody. It seemed very convenient that he wasn't able to do that, or didn't want to, The only thing that I would accept was Mantis's sleepy thingy, and that didn't account for all of the times where he could have killed somebody and didn't. The explanation was because it's good for the plot that not everyone dies, but that, I don't feel like that's enough. Otherwise, what else is there to say that hasn't been said? The theming in this is one of the best in the MCU, dealing with like fatherhood and family. It's interesting kind of fundamental stuff that makes all of these characters better characters. Again, I wish they had developed Gamora more, because of reasons, later on. But for what there is, it's all right. I just wanted more out of that. Maybe even another movie, but I bet they didn't have time. It was a schedule thing. So Age of Ultron is, I think everyone calls this the worst Avengers movie. And it's definitely the wonkiest. I would say that it's about on par with Endgame, and I'll explain. First of all, it is not on par visually. There are visual effects that are straight up errors. And I don't know whether they didn't have time. They had the money. I don't know whether they didn't have time or what. Just hire more people. You guys have billions of dollars. God. But the beginning fight scene is sort of ridiculous looking, and you can tell that there are bad, like, graphic stuff happening, right? You can tell easily. However, the saving points of this movie are very, very good. If you are a fan of the if you're a fan of the comic books Ultron, you're probably not going to like this Ultron. They are distinct. They are incredibly different. But I like this Ultron. I like the idea that this is how a robot conceptualizes the divine, because he does talk about God a lot, and it's like a theme for him. It's not that he is a god, it's that these inevitable extinctions are God. This progress towards destruction, and then recreation is God. And then it sort of makes you wonder, why didn't he consider that if the humans are going to do this to themselves anyway, let them? Why do you feel the need to expedite the process? And that's sort of one of his flaws, is he's got ego in him, and that is from Tony Stark. We see that he has a lot of Tony Stark in him, and it's like he's sort of a dark reflection of Tony Stark, who we know the most by this point. And I don't know, I just think his writing is really clever basically all the time. He appears to care for no humans except for a couple. It's like he's so frustrating because he's not quite any one thing, and that's really what a person is. He is the most complete AI because he's so much like a human being. This is actually the funny thing I wanted to bring up. I think it's funny how Loki's scepter, when they try to get the stone out of it, it changes from blue to yellow because they already have a blue stone. So they have to use a yellow one, and we still don't really know where Loki's scepter came from. As far as I remember, he just had it in Avengers. Maybe Thanos let him borrow it. I don't know. But it was really not bad. I believed all the scenarios. The dumbest part of the movie absolutely was when Quicksilver died, and I think that was a contract thing, because they could have used him often, because I like him, and they don't have any other fast people. And the best part of the movie, besides maybe the characterization of Ultron, is the Hulkbuster scene. The way that Hulk is portrayed in the Avengers movies, in the entire MCU really, is important, because I don't think that people understood until that point that the Hulk is not a mech, he's not a Godzilla type. He doesn't move slow and rip stuff apart. He is frantic and frenetic. He is a person having a stroke, like he's spasming. But no matter what he does in his clumsy, thoughtless rage, he cannot be stopped from doing it. So, like, if he walks out of a building and bumps his head, for anybody else, they'd pause for a second. He just, breaks through it because he's the Hulk. Clumsiness being allowed by the environment is a certain kind of aesthetic. It's sort of an energizing, it's just a fantastic visual representation of the Hulk and the things the Hulk represents thematically. So 2 for 2. I think the plot was overall really good, and I think the characterization was overall really good. It stumbled in parts about as much as Endgame did. Some things weren't taken as seriously as they could have been, just like in Endgame. I think it gets a bad rap because there's a lot to appreciate about it, and people forget about that because, I don't know, Ultron's not the way he is in the comic books. I don't know what the problem is. Anyway, that's August 28th. No, April 28th. That's April 28th. Those three. And we're going on to day, oh God, is it 5? Day 5? This takes stamina, dude. Even if you're really into the movies, this takes stamina. All right. April 29th. This is the 5th day, I think. So today I did Ant-Man 1, Captain America 3, which is Captain America Civil War, and what was the last one? Black Panther. So now we start to see the MCU sort of not fall apart, but it's not quite as cohesive as it was in the first phase. There are more people, they're doing more things, and they need to be introduced inside cameos before their big movie. And it does work a lot of the oh yeah, I forgot, sorry, I also watched Spider-Man Homecoming because I needed another 4-movie day because of how big this project is. Anyway, let's start with the movies. First one, Ant-Man. I remember that I really liked Ant-Man in the theaters. It was one of the maybe 4 Marvel movies that I saw in the theaters, and at that point it was because another movie had sold out and I went to see Ant-Man instead. Weird, right? I don't remember which one, but I remember it was like, especially for an Ant-Man movie, it was really cool. It was a little clumsy sometimes, like the explanation of going subatomic was obvious, and it was obvious he was going to have to do it. And it was obvious when he was going to do it, and he didn't need to tell me I have to go subatomic to slip between those atoms. I figured it out, thank you. I hope most people did. However, what was clever about that is that they made sure to note that it is a place without time or space, so that, one, the professor's wife would be alive. I don't know whether that comes up. I have not seen Ant-Man and the Wasp yet, because it was on Netflix, but I looked boring and I didn't want to. But it also allowed for the post-snap Ant-Man to do some stuff, as he escaped the quantum realm, I think. I forgot. It's a complicated movie. We'll get to that, obviously. But no, it was really cool. I think it would be really cool if they leaned into him more as a Robin Hood type. I think that would be a really fun offset to the rest of the group, because as you're watching these extremely powerful people do their stuff, we don't have a whole lot of people from, like, the lower echelons of society, at least until Spider-Man, right? So we've got just a criminal who is very good at hacking, who steals rich people's stuff and gives it to poor people. And it's like, that'd be pretty rad. It would be very cool if that's how he met Tony. Like, he bypassed Stark security and stole a bunch of things. It would be funny. We get in Spider-Man a working class hero, if you will. But anyway, Ant-Man is all right. I found the relationship to be almost tedious. It's like they didn't have the time to set it up, so they just sort of threw a couple lines in there. It was really funny, though. There were some great gaffes and gags, jokes, funny. And that is, of course, because the director was Edgar Wright, and they need to bring the man back, bring him back. As for the plot, heist movie's fine. We get the heist movie in Endgame, though, so I don't know why they did it here also. You only really need one, especially because the focus is not the heist part. Heist part lasts about 15 minutes, and it's a 2-hour movie. So on to Captain America Civil War. Now, this was essentially an Avengers movie. I believe they had the Avengers soundtrack at one point. I'm like... or at least they had something approaching the Avengers soundtrack, and they did it on purpose. You start to notice a trend with Captain America movies. They're more about politics and espionage than the rest of the movies. So anything involving those things is going to be a Captain America movie. It's a very strange sort of thing they've gone with, because now that there's no Captain America, what are they going to do? And a lot of people adore this movie. It doesn't quite gel with the Civil War arc in the comics, which is fine, because I didn't really like that in the comics. We have this build-up towards a political dispute between Tony Stark and Steve Rogers, right? And they each recruit certain Avengers, including not quite Avengers yet, in order to help them. So, like, Captain America gets Ant-Man, right? And Iron Man gets Spider-Man. Lots of men going on here. And the fight is very, very cool. The fight is rad. And we all like to see superheroes fight each other, and this was really cool. When it becomes personal, you'd think that would sort of ruin the tension that's been building between these two political halves, but I think it sort of ties a bow on it. I think it sort of completes it. Because, one, Tony is who we know the most, and so we completely understand his as he begins to grow an empathy, it's starting to hit him hard because he's never done that before. So I like the idea of him not quite understanding the utilitarian, even if we cannot save everybody, we must save some people sort of thing that Captain America is going for. He wants to save all people if he can, and if he will hurt someone, he wants to be restricted. And that's like they're both interesting perspectives. And when we cap that off with him addressing his trauma directly in the form of the final confrontation, which, by the way, is very cool, that sort of gives him a little character arc there, and it's going to continue. Iron Man's character is probably the best in the series, and that's hard to say because there are, like, a lot of very good characters, but It's definitely the most explored, so we get the most to work with. The writing is a little more dry than usual because it takes itself very seriously because it's Civil War. As we progress through these Avengers movies, Hawkeye becomes more and more amazing, and I love him. And I really hope he gets... He didn't retire at the end of Endgame, so he's going to get his own movie, hopefully. Something like that, please. I just want a Hawkeye. I want Jeremy Renner to be Hawkeye. He's very good. Because in the comics, Hawkeye's a douchebag, and, like... he plays him in that direction, but not quite as far as it is in the comics. Anyway, after that was Black Panther, and Black Panther's always been really rad. Some of the designs in this movie are like the best in the MCU. Like the design of Wakanda just makes me think all the time. Like it's very, very cool, and you only see it for maybe 5 minutes out of the whole movie. You see the city itself, but like it gets in your head because it's like, wow, how does and who and when and why? Introducing vibranium in this fashion, especially tying it in with the theme of tradition, is a pretty smart move, honestly. Because now we have a new super element in the universe that we can do to explain more super stupid stuff, which we need because it's going to only get weirder from here, right? Welcome to comics. And the way they're tying that into tradition is super interesting for a number of reasons. First of all, tradition is what's going to hold a lot of people back in the MCU, and already sort of has, in the same way it's sort of held the world back, because these people will not offer technological advancements that could save millions of lives because, you know, they're afraid of being attacked or something, even though they have all the weapons in the world. It's like the wizards in Harry Potter. They're just stupid and mean is really what it comes down to. They're not actually going to be hurt by the entire world turning on them. They could just help, but they sort of refuse to. It's absurd for sure. And that's why the subject is tackled so wholly in the movie. It takes a lot of time. Now, the other subject that's tackled in the movie is the hardest in the MCU. Killmonger is almost correct, often. And his entire thing is, like, why are you stealing from people who you invaded and murdered? He's anti-colonialist. His idea of anti-colonialism is an armed revolution, which we can get into. I personally don't like, because I would probably be killed. No, thank you. But the sentiment of it is completely fine. Like, villains have been getting slowly more, oh, that makes sense, as we progress. Like, a lot of them are doing it for revenge, and that's fair because the Avengers are not controlled very well, so they kill probably a lot of people. But this guy's just like, oh, by the way, there is a systemic problem with race in the whole world, and we need to fix it. And the way that I plan to do it is lots and lots of killing. We're gonna coup the world from the inside out. And it's like, on one hand, I get it. On the other hand, you know, if he had just talked this out with someone, and if he had just, like, you know, done a little bit of, like, theory, would have been fine. Yeah, just say it. Also, the shield guys who have the coats and it turns into a shield, that is the coolest tech in the entire MCU. And I don't know why I like it so much, but it is very, very cool. Just like, and it's like, anyway, fourth movie, God, was Spider-Man Homecoming, which I have seen several times. The MCU and the new animated Spider-Man have gotten me officially into Spider-Man. I used to not even like Spider-Man. I was like a funny, quippy boy. Got it. What he's gone through in these films has been more interesting than I would have thought. And I like how, what's his name? The actor plays a 15-year-old even though he's like 24. He's just got that face. Now, for the plot itself, this is actually, like, pretty solid as a plot goes. Again, we have a villain who's basically correct. The government and the elite have stolen from him, and he just steals it back. He should not be so gung-ho about murder. That's the thing that they gave him to make him unlikable. But he also, in the post-credit scene, he didn't sell out Spider-Man's identity to the Scorpion, which is very nice of him. Who, by the way, we're going to see in the future, which is going to be very cool. That's the guy who plays Ignacio Vargas. Is that his last name, Vargas? In Better Call Saul. And he is... And I can't wait to see him just go completely off the hook. Now, he's also the guy who did the Far Cry with the... He's the Far Cry guy who did the... He was angry. Remember that from Far Cry? I didn't play Far Cry. One of the funniest Marvel movies. The jokes are just... I don't know. Maybe they're basic, but they really have good impact, and I love them. Like, they're discussing something serious, and Ned is just like, do you lay eggs? Peter turns around and he goes, what? No. And it makes you think, yeah, you lay eggs, don't you? And the idea of alien tech sort of filtering its way down into the general population is another really good universal detail that we can maybe see built on in the future. For some reason, I had forgotten the plot, and I thought the little purple thingy was like an Infinity Stone, and I'm like, well, no, you don't have one of those. Are you kidding? That would mean that 4 are on Earth at the same time. That's not good. Anyway, Spider-Man Homecoming is a blast, and all the Spider-Man movies are. I know everyone really likes the Sam Raimi ones. I don't, but I might talk about that later. This actor is probably one of the best playing Spider-Man. He gets across, I am a child, I am a fool, I am a nerd, and that is all it is. I am somewhat funny, unconfident perhaps. I love him. I love him so much. That was April 29th. And today we're going to have more. 3 more for today. Let's go, boys. Let's get her done. All right. All right. So April 30th. I did Ant-Man and the Wasp, I did Thor Ragnarok, and I did Doctor Strange. And this is the point where I switched it up a little bit, and I actually did Ant-Man and the Wasp just, like, the last one, just before Infinity War. Because the post-credit scene is post-snap. And that's good timing, I think. It's better. I've improved upon the thing. Thanks to someone on Discord. It wasn't me who came up with that. So I started off with Doctor Strange because Thor Ragnarok has Doctor Strange in it. And you should know, you could have guessed, Doctor Strange is my favorite. I love him. And bring him back, please. I would not mind a whole TV show about a Doctor Strange. Here's why. Up until this point, the MCU, although being fantastical, has pretended to be sci-fi. You know what I mean? Like, everything that appears to be mystical is aliens or special technology, you know? This is like the first really mystical thing that's happened. It's really fantasy. It's weird stuff about the soul and chakras and blah, 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 you know? So... you go for it. I really like Doctor Strange as a character also. I think that he has one of the best character arcs in a single movie in the entire MCU. Oh. The song in the world. Alright. Okay. My camera ran out of space. Okay, so we were talking first about Doctor Strange, because this is what I watched first, and it's my favorite, and I love it. I have seen Doctor Strange like 5 times, so this was not a new experience for me. So first of all, he has the most characterizing scene in the entire MCU, which is when he argues with his, the girl, you know, Dr. Palmer. I don't know their relationship even. It's real, it's legit, and it's kind of spooky because it's like you can't really dig yourself back out of that one. You have to rely on her to accept that you're a little out of it right now, emotionally speaking. Like, that line could have gone in a completely mundane drama, and it would have been really good. Or not even just the line, I mean the scene, right? Yes, his studying is sort of quick. He does know things very fast. And at least he points out, you know, I have an eidetic memory or whatever. we can't spend a whole movie on him learning. If you really want like more of a full learning experience, there is an animated film about Doctor Strange. I think is also just called Doctor Strange, which is also his origin and how he starts to learn things. And it's kind of cooler. Even it's a little less. I would call it a little less subtle. So Mordo's the bad guy. Mordo has always been a very strong antagonist towards Doctor Strange, right? Um, and in the animated movie, it's obvious. And in this movie, he's part of the team the whole time. The only time he becomes an antagonist is after, like, during the end credits scene, right? And I like Mordo a lot. And he's also one of those villains that's basically correct, but the way he goes about being correct is incorrect. And I sure wish they would have a point where the heroes have to address that all of these villains have a pretty decent point. I guess that was part of Civil War, but even then, like, you're missing a couple key villains. Yeah, I've gotten sidetracked. The plot to Doctor Strange is very simple. Big bad guy coming must stop, right? We get to learn what the time stone is. We get to learn how it works. Doctor Strange is able to use it, which is very cool because I don't think anyone else is able to use an Infinity Stone. I know that Star-Lord, Peter Quill, is able to grab one. He can't use it, though, I don't think. Also, the whole thing about immortality and mortality and power and, blah, blah, blah. It makes for, like, a solid... I wouldn't call it philosophical, maybe emotional base to an MCU movie in particular. And, like, I wish that more movies did. Iron Man 2 did that. I still don't remember whether everyone likes or hates Iron Man 2, but I really like it because I think it might be the best Iron Man movie, personally. But Doctor Strange has that. And we don't get that in all of the MCU. We don't even get that in a lot of it, That puts it a tier above the others, I think. Also, visually, best MCU movie. I will take absolutely no arguments here. The visual effects in Doctor Strange are awesome all the time because they were based off the original Doctor Strange comics, which I think they started in the 60s, and it was totally psychedelic. It was just crazy and cosmic and wild, and it was based on like Star Child aesthetic, and it's like, yes, more of this, please. There is a Doctor Strange 2, right? I think there is. Oh man. Oh. Anyway, possibly my favorite MCU movie. I wouldn't call it the best MCU movie. I would call it my favorite. Yes, they can be different things. You have no idea how many people I have to explain this to. Anyway, so I don't want to rant on about how great it is. It's the Wi-Fi password. We're not savages. After that was Thor Ragnarok. And Thor Ragnarok, Taika Waititi, it's a good movie. I need to preface this with that because I am going to tear it apart a little bit. It's a good movie. It's fun. It's funny. The plot is like a really twisted Planet Hulk. They couldn't do the full Planet Hulk because Planet Hulk is literally just Hulk, but it's not even the Savage Hulk that's been in the MCU. I think it's like a more intelligent Hulk that is in Planet Hulk. He talks and stuff. You know what? I think that sort of leaked into the script because one of the gripes I have with Thor Ragnarok is that the Hulk is not angry enough. Like, if the Hulk stops being angry all the time, he stops being the Hulk, at least that we know in the MCU. The MCU Hulk, as we know, would be called Savage Hulk, basically. He has no, not even basically, that is his name, that is his title, Savage Hulk. He cannot brain. He can say a handful of words and he smashes stuff, and he is perpetually furious. That is his thing. So if we get a Hulk that can have a conversation and make decisions, it's no longer Savage Hulk, right? It has to be a different one, but he still has that weird grammar thing that he can't talk good. By all rules, he should have turned back to Banner very quickly. The Hulk cannot rationalize, and so even if he is being placated by winning all the time, that's really not what the Hulk is about. It's not about him being angry at being a failure or something. It's just about unbridled, sourceless rage, like just complete frenetic destruction. That's the Hulk. Another couple problems. One, this is where Thor changed completely. Like, Thor, remember I sort of defended the original Thor by saying, like, since we have the rest of the MCU, the Thor continuity is fine the way it is, in that it's sort of a traditional mythological blended with American story. You know what I mean? Like love at first sight, big monsters that are innately evil that want to destroy all things. Man becomes hero. He has to restore honor to the throne. Like it's Greek. It's a Greek myth basically, except the lover is a girl. And so in Thor Ragnarok, when Thor picks up on modern like vocabulary and slang and sort of a method of speaking that's more modern, I think he spent like 2 years, was it on Earth, doing like learning things, and I guess there would have been some bleed, right? Some he would have gotten some sort of patter from Earth, but too much, I think. And this is a mishandling of Thor that we're going to see later too in Endgame. Thor still spent 1,000 years being Thor on his home planet on Asgard, right? So he would still fundamentally rely on these sort of outdated speaking methods and behaviors, like the joke about, there's a woman force and that's good, and power to, like, that joke would not have been. He would have been respectful to the Valkyrie, like that's Thor. You could say he's sort of falling apart because of all the bad things that have happened to him and he's coping with humor. I can buy that, but they need to make it obvious. I don't want it to be a fan theory. I want it to be clear. And we do get a hint towards that in Endgame, and then Thor is mistreated, and that is frustrating. I didn't hate it maybe as much as some people did, but it was frustrating. Ragnarok, otherwise, like, first of all, extremely colorful movie. It's a really nice looking film. The colors, of course, were in the rainbow phase of the MCU, so everything is very bright and fun. The one scene that I thought really took this away was towards the end when Loki and Thor are teamed up and they're firing, I don't know, lasers at some people, and the bad people laser is pink and the good people laser is bright neon green, and I'm like, those go together, yeah, nice. It's like a watermelon. I didn't hate the plot. The plot is, I think, what most people would dislike, because it's Hela sort of comes out of nowhere, and I get that Hela sort of comes out of nowhere, but Hela is still really cool. They should have taken her modern patter away. They shouldn't have made jokes with her, because she is incredibly threatening. This is like an Olympian. It's a pre-god. Like, if Thor is the god of thunder, Hela is the god of death, but she's more like a titan, like an Olympian, you know what I mean? Because her power is... It's early on, it's explained that it's unmatched. She breaks the hammer and is like, what? And she proceeds to wipe out the entire soldier force of Asgard, just wipes him out without even much effort. And she did the same thing to the Valkyries a long time ago. So only Odin, I suppose, was able to stop her, and now he is dead. So she was a really cool villain. And Ragnarok, like the actual Ragnarok, was the only way to really defeat her, and it didn't feel out of place. It was very obviously like explained, like you could see it coming, but it felt justified. We didn't need to have Thor suddenly become an ultra god, because that would have screwed with balance later. Instead, we had a force of nature essentially take out this villain. Anyway, Thor Ragnarok, good. I would say, like, objectively speaking, probably the best Thor movie. Not my favorite Thor movie. The more I think about it, the more I like Thor 1 and then Thor 2. Ragnarok probably above Thor 2, only because Thor 2 does sort of drag at times. But, like, honestly, they all have their pros and cons, and I'm not rating these on a numeric scale, like I said. So, finally, before Infinity War, we got to Ant-Man and the Wasp. Ant-Man and the Wasp was one of the, like, 2 MCU movies that I had not seen. And I don't know why, because Ant-Man 1 was really, really good, and when I saw Ant-Man and the Wasp, like, on Netflix, I glanced at it, and I was like, I don't know if I want to watch this. Like, it seems boring, but it's not. As always, Ant-Man with the size stuff, super creative. Like, you can do all kinds of creative combat with that, and they did. They really rolled with it. it is very silly. It's a very silly movie. Like, I only sort of buy the stakes, only a little bit. And the fact that it's very silly, like there's this southern gentleman, and he's played by the guy from The Hateful Eight, which I noticed because he's got the mouth. Uh, is I'm gonna get some business done, and it's like, okay, buddy, what are you doing in like California? And we've got all kinds of comic relief. It's almost half the movie. Card tricks. The police guy who tries to do the card tricks and doesn't, and he sucks at being a police. Um, the ex-cons founding the business called ex-con, which is a security business, which is very silly. Like, it's mostly jokes. It's a comedy, you know, and that's why it's very strange that the villain is someone who is perpetually in pain and wants to stop being perpetually in pain. And this is solved with magic healing powers that are not quite telegraphed. They're almost telegraphed. They kind of are, but they're not quite. And it's very out of left field. And I don't know if she has those now, because that makes her a superhero. And like, sure, send in more Wasp Gen 1 working with Wasp Gen 2. I don't know what you'd call both of them, because they're both the Wasp. As for the plot, like I said, like the rest of the movie, it's very silly. It's a heist, and they're stealing a building because they shrunk it down, which is cute. It's just silly. And we had Morpheus, the guy who played Morpheus in it, and he was also in Hannibal, and he was fun in Hannibal also. And I love him. And that's two Hannibal actors in a row. We got Doctor Strange, and we got Ant-Man and Wasp. Altogether, not as good as the first Ant-Man. I can see why it's got like a 6 out of 10 on IMDb or whatever. That's fair. That means it's above average. 5 out of 10 is average. I will fight everybody who wants to screw with the objective numeral system. Like, don't do that. It's dumb. It's not a failing grade. God. This has gone on way long. So, anyway, tomorrow I will be finishing it up. That'll be May 1st. May the 1st be with me. And that'll be Infinity War, and then immediately Endgame, and then Far From Home. I have already seen Far From Home a lot. I like Spider-Man, and we'll see. All right. So, May 1st was the end of the thing. It's done. So, of course, I watched Infinity War, Endgame, and Far From Home, which was not on the list, but it came out probably after the list. So I just put it in there. Let's start this off by saying that Infinity War is the best MCU movie. Infinity War has a couple bumps in terms of comedy. That is literally the only bad thing that I can say about it. There are some jokes that are not funny, and there's only like 2. As for the rest of the movie, it's almost perfect. And that's weird to say because it's a movie about superheroes. The pacing in this movie is a work of art, because we have how many characters? We have like at least a dozen characters, more than a dozen characters. All of them get enough time to be characters, and also enough time to be characterized. It never feels like it's gone too fast. You know what I mean? It always feels like there has been just enough time for us to get to know these characters and know what they're doing right now in this instance with this problem. We have a lot of endings here, obviously, here in an Endgame. We have a lot of... keep losing my train of thought. It's because it's early. We have a lot of character endings for characters. The arcs are completed here, and they're completed in Endgame. And these two back-to-back, watching them, like, so close together like this is really good. It's a great experience. And if they wanted to, they could probably re-release them in theaters as a back-to-back sort of marathon thing, and I might even go see it. Because it really is like that big. It's a huge set of movies. Infinity War itself is slightly better than Endgame, but only slightly, and only for a couple reasons. we finally get a little hint towards the Olympian Thor, which I was talking about that I missed. And I forgot to mention this in my Ragnarok review, but the fact that he's not with Jane anymore and it was just sort of dropped, that's the worst thing that the MCU has done. I know that people were probably complaining because the romance was shallow, but the chemistry wasn't. The chemistry between the actors I felt was pretty legit, and they could have just rolled with that. Like, I know that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that they're into each other, but they are. Deal with it. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes people are just like all over each other for virtually no reason, but it works out. You know, people are weird, especially when we're talking about Thor, who is contextualized as this classical myth in this universe, and that's gone. But we get a little bit of that back with like we had a little bit in Ragnarok with the Wagner, like with the Valkyries and the big painting like cinematography, which is the best scene. And then we get that again with Thor holding the forge thingy open, and it looks like Hercules, like the little, and he's in the starlight. It's a great shot. The amount of variance between these characters and the way they slip into a narrative works really well. And man, if they just cut some of those bad jokes, like, the whole thing would be the best movie in the MCU. My favorite, at least, is what I mean. Because I think qualitatively it is the best. Just because of how meticulously it's put together. And definitely the impact of the final 15 minutes or so. That, I guarantee you that scared kids. That's why they had to get the second movie out in a year, because people were hanging on to this thing. Even watching it back now, it's still incredibly impactful. It was very tasteful. Like, they didn't use huge dramatic music. They had it almost silent. There was sort of a horror droning noise, and then like the rush of wind. Like, that was a stroke of brilliance. They really could have gone like full, like, put the John Williams and do the but they didn't. It was. I am not a fan of scores dictating mood. It needs to complement. It cannot dictate. As for the plot work too. Iron Man had. Iron Man's character arc in becoming empathetic culminated here. And I know that people think that it culminated in Endgame, but it didn't. We got to see how his empathy destroyed him here. And then in Endgame, we got to see instead how his empathy let him become greater than himself. Does that make sense? So the arc, basically, it ended here. And then we got an additional burst of heroism, which is really good. Speaking of, let's just skip right into Endgame. Endgame is, I think the fact that people were disappointed is disappointing. It is a great movie. Not only is it good for the fans, like when I was in theaters and Captain America picked up Thor's hammer, people screamed. People were screaming. They were like, ah! And I get it. The MCU specifically has built up the hammer and its enchantment and whatever. But of course, if you're into comics, you know that that's not like that special. I guess it's special in the MCU. In the comics, like, how many people have picked up the hammer? There's a lot of hammer people. A lot of people died in these two movies permanently, which is great. People need to do that more with their... Imagine how much better Harry Potter would be if someone died. Someone important, not Sirius Black, who cares? Someone who, like, had an impact on the story beyond, like, I'm your father's cousin's former roommate. And it's like, cool, dude. I get inside track. The Endgame plot with time, I get why that's a little silly to people. People who have not read comics, but, you know, people, anyway. And, like, thematically, it makes perfect sense. They could not do what I wanted, which was to have everyone snapped actually be going to a new dimension, a new parallel Earth, and then having to make do on that Earth, and that would be Phase 4. We would get a new movie with each of these characters who, but contracts, I guarantee, would not allow for that. That's another 10 years of movies. These people, they could not. I get it. So wrapping it up in this way, in a way that allows them to address problems with their past more directly, is smart. It's clever, and I like it. We got a little bit of catharsis for everybody in Endgame. Even Black Widow. If you were doing the MCU thing like I was doing, you start to pick up a pattern in her character arc, and that's like, the fact that she doesn't have a movie and still has like a decent character arc that is resolved. It's like the planning is crazy. How did they do? But they did. The one thing that I did not particularly like is that they felt compelled to prove Captain Marvel was warranted by having the other characters like her a lot. And they shouldn't, because they didn't. Let me explain. So, the characters were generally hostile towards Captain Marvel. And that makes sense because she appears out of nowhere and is Superman. That's going to, jumpstart you. But then Thor with, like, I like this one, while she does basically nothing yet. Rocket being snide and then being told off and then accepting being told off. People have been snide to Rocket for every movie. He's not just going to take it sitting down, and then when she comes in at the end, we have a shot of Rocket going, oh, yeah. And it's like, no, we can go, oh, yeah. We don't need your confirmation to go, oh, yeah. It didn't trust the audience enough to appreciate Captain Marvel. And that's kind of fair because a lot of people don't, because they released her movie way too close before Endgame. Like I said, if they released Captain Marvel after Hulk, it would have been good. But that wasn't in the plan at that point, so that makes sense. Which is why this watch order is very good, is because you have this character that is mythologized and built up way before you see her do anything. There were a lot of great combat moments. Seeing all the armies come together was another, like, whoa kind of thing. And I think that fan service like that is important because we know these characters. We're not coming to this movie to learn new characters or to appreciate new themes. We know where these arcs are. We know where they're headed, So what we need now is a conclusive and complete ending point. You know what I mean? In this and Infinity War specifically, fan service is much appreciated. Because that's what we're here for. That's literally the point of the film, is to wrap up a series of arcs and a series of themes. And it does. I can't really think of a dropped theme. I just thought about it. I can't think of one. And then finally, Far From Home. I have actually seen Far From Home a lot. Like 3 times. By the time that I watched this, that's the 4th time. Because, like I said, the MCU got me interested in Spider-Man when I was not previously. I really like Tom Holland as Spider-Man. It's perfect. And the fact that he's not in college, that he's a high school kid, it really fits with the themes of the entire universe. Far From Home, I agree with a lot of people. I agree that it works without the super stuff. And I agree that it's slightly better than Homecoming. Only because Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio is perfect, and I love both of them. Jake Gyllenhaal is one of my favorite actors, especially for humor, and Mysterio is one of my favorite Spider-Man villains. I like a villain that only has one trick and has to be creative with it. I like any character like that, really. Creativity with your single ability is such a good trope. It's always flexible, and it's always interesting. And I love it. Mysterio has unlimited capacity to be creative, so we get really great visuals in this, sort of like in Doctor Strange. because he's using essentially illusions, like illusion magic. He's using mind-altering stuff. And you'd say, oh, it's just projections. It cannot be. If you've seen these visuals, you know that it cannot be. It has to be a number of other things. Some sort of gas, I don't know. But it doesn't matter because it's cool. The levels of intrigue are good. The comedy is good, which is important. Spider-Man as a potential replacement for Iron Man is a little strange. I guess in role, he can maybe be an Iron Man-like figure. But even then, not that much. Because I have a feeling we're going to see another Iron Man. Maybe in Morgan Stark, who was a character in the comics. I forgot exactly. I think it was a dude in the comics. The plot was fun. And it being the first movie to follow Endgame, to lighten the mood again, I think was a pretty good play. Starting it out with Black Widow would have been a disaster, I think. Because Black Widow it's going to be such a melancholy movie now that all the characters that are important sort of began a new arc. Even Nick Fury. Nick Fury has been beaten down. He used to be the head of S.H.I.E.L.D. S.H.I.E.L.D. got taken apart. He got snapped away and then came back, and now he's just in the middle of nowhere with nothing. He has a couple loyal people, otherwise nothing. Now, the question as to Stark technology and the question as to Mysterio and the end of the movie with Spider-Man's identity, I have no idea. This is partly why I'm excited to see new MCU stuff, is because if they left us with Endgame, good. It is done. 3 phases. 12 years. That's plenty, right? And then they drop this, which is going to twist up the universe as we know it so hard. I don't even know how they're going to address it. It's going to be cool. And it was very clever marketing, too. Also, it's funny because in Infinity War and also Endgame, they said Mayday, and I watched them both on Mayday. So, it's pretty. So, recap. In general, I like the MCU because it takes the excitement and vivacity and fantasy of comics and turns it into movies. It does not need to be more than that. It does have some themes that you can think about, but not for very long, and it doesn't need to. If you want an art house film, go watch The Lighthouse. These are movies that you're supposed to enjoy as they happen. You're supposed to enjoy the frenetic action, almost like slapstick. It's got the same sort of enjoyment as slapstick, but it's not funny. It's visceral, and it's fun. You're supposed to enjoy the jokes, and there are a lot of jokes. There are even jokes in the less jokey movies. Like that one character from the first 2 Thor movies, the girl who's just sarcastic. I love her, and I want her back. Bring her back. And it's beginning to create a world that is exactly as twisted and bizarre as comics. And that's saying something. If they continue doing this, and they continue getting new characters and shuffling through, iterations maybe, you do it. I would watch it. I would watch all of it. Do it. And I know people are fatigued, but don't watch them then. You can ignore the hype. Get off Facebook. Duh. I'm very tired. This is a taxing marathon. Even if you're into it, it is rough. It is many hours a day. And it could only really be done during quarantine. And that's what I've been doing. So, now that it's done, I must find something else to occupy my time. I hope. Well, the camera died, and I don't need a camera for this last bit. I hope you enjoyed my dumb little vlog. Like, and comment, and subscribe. You have to now because I said so. And I will do a video essay soon-ish
Quarantine's kind of taken a lot out of me. So, like, comment, and subscribe. Ring that bell. Oh man, I need something to eat. Goodbye.